Hello, everyone, and welcome to the ultimate MCU villain rankings. So, my Captain Marvel review. Sorry, I'm gonna move this thing out of the way because I don't even need it. Hold on, there we go. My Marvel and Captain Marvel review made me think. Okay, what are the best villains that Marvel's ever had? And I made a ranking system, tier list. So the criteria I'm just going to go through before we start this, just because I need people to understand the methodology behind this, right? So they must have been a villain in a live action main continuity MCU movie. So a theatrical movie, and that includes Black Widow. We're counting that one as a theatrical movie. So basically, the villain had to be, the villain of, and we'll talk in a second, but the main villain of a theatrical main continuity MCU movie. So the Fox X-Men movies, the Sony Spider-Man movies don't count. They must have been the main villain. If it was I made judgment calls for most of them. If it was unclear, I just looked up the main villain. And tiers are not ordered from left to right; they're just tiered, right? So like bottom to top. So the order is kind of arbitrary in the tier itself. So that doesn't matter. So if there's one guy there, one guy whatever, that doesn't matter. So TV shows can help villains who have been villains in movies, but no one who's been a villain who hasn't been a villain in a movie is eligible for this tier list, right? So any of the TV show villains who were villains just in the TV show are not eligible, but people who were villains in the movies who end up in the TV shows are eligible. Now, this is also fluid ranking. It can change from, again, as we see more of some of these characters, it can change. So this isn't like set in stone by any means. And movie quality is generally irrelevant outside, like, including names, history of actors or characters. So I kind of like disregarded all of those outside factors and focused on purely how they're portrayed in the movies that they're in, right? So, like, there's some characters who you're gonna be like, but that character is really well known, but it's not or a really good villain in the comics or in this game, right? Like, but those aren't the metrics I'm using. I'm using the metrics of within the MCU. So I kind of just try to disregard, I guess, what they do in the comics or what they have done in the comics, which puts some people a little bit lower than I think people would like, but And also, What If doesn't count because I don't know, it's weird. I don't even know, like, there's only one character who really might be helped by What If, and I don't think it matters. So, anyways, now with that all being said, let's start. And disagree with me in the comments, please. I you may have different opinions. That's okay. So to start off, we got our first tier, and our first tier is who. Now, all these villains are either irrelevant because they hold their movies back, or are just generally forgettable, and if you kind of just went to a general audience member, they would just not remember who this villain was. Some of these villains have motivations which are good, but at the same time, or like, good villain motivations, but at the same time, they just kind of don't really move the needle for any of their movies. Ronan was the weirdest one probably on this list because he was really helped by Captain Marvel to some extent, but at the same time, I couldn't justify putting him any higher on the list just because he was just so pointless in Guardians that it just kind of, you can't. I just go back to where the movie, I watched the movie and I'm like, ugh, like I can't just, even if he's good-ish in Captain Marvel, I can't justify moving him up anymore. I think the most controversial character in this tier is probably Obadiah Stane, who's in this tier, and people are probably scratching their heads about that one. And I thought, he's one of the least impactful Marvel villains, like Iron Man villains. He doesn't really do that much. He doesn't really influence the character like long term. I don't know. I just feel like he's like one of the, obviously he's in the bottom tier of MCU villains. I don't think there's anything special about him, and he also doesn't make it. And I there's a few tiers I was thinking about putting. He moved down consistently as I was making these tiers, because I was kind of not sure what to do with him, but that's the situation. And obviously you have Gore, you have Malekith, you have Arthur Killian, you have Ronan, you have Dar-Ben, you have Whiplash, you have Caecilius, you have Jude Law's Marvel. Now, going on to the next tier, we have the tier EMH question mark. Now, this tier is the Earth's Mightiest Heroes tier. Now, you may be wondering, okay, why is this tier called the Earth's Mightiest Heroes tier? Well, I'll tell you why. Basically, all of these characters are just good guys who are just kind of misunderstood. You have now I'll talk about the controversial one in this tier, which is that Bucky Barnes is in this tier. Okay, now hear me out before you get mad about this one. Okay, so this tier is like these villains are like basically heroes now, or theorized to be heroes. You know, you've got Ghost, who I think is considered a hero now. Taskmaster, who's not considered a villain, and you have obviously Bucky, who's considered a hero. But I think this is the thing, right? Which is, as much as I don't like the character, that's not why he's here, right? This is not my hatred for Bucky Barnes, but I think the reason he's here is because I went back and kind of looked at his character arc, right? And he hasn't, like, he was kind of a bad guy in the Winter Soldier, right? He hasn't been a hero. He's been a hero outside of that. Like, outside of the Winter Soldier, he's really been a hero. The only problem with the Winter Soldier, I had to kind of include somebody here because, in the Winter Soldier, you know, I obviously Robert Redford's character, Alexander, whatever his name is, would be in the bottom tier, and you know, I felt like, you know, for balance sake, and also I do feel like he was the main villain in that movie, even though, you know, maybe certain people may disagree with that, and I just don't, like, he hasn't been a great bad guy. I think if this was a heroes tier, and if I do a heroes tier, he'll be much higher up, but I think just because I haven't seen, like, we haven't seen that main villain, like, from him a bunch, like, kind of in Civil War, but at the same time, it wasn't, like, the star of that movie in any sense. So Alexander Pierce, is Robert Redford's character in The Winter Soldier, but he, you know, either way, I don't know. I don't think that there is much of a like, I don't know. I just don't see any real reason why he is I don't see any reason to kind of put him higher up, right? And so I think that's kind of, at the end of the day, the situation there. Now let's move on to the next thing, which is, there we go. The next tier, sorry, I'm just trying to, there we go, which is Disney Plus subs. Now, all these villains in this tier would probably be day one Disney Plus subscribers, either hoping that their characters would get a chance to get a rework on the TV shows. Now, some of these characters did get a chance to get a rework on the TV shows. You know, you look at Abomination. Obviously, Abomination got a little bit of a rework on the TV shows. Zemo and Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Red Skull was a little bit different. I'll talk about him in a minute. Obviously, Kang appeared first on the TV shows. And then obviously we saw that MODOK, aka the Yellow Jacket, right? He is also a Darren Cross, right? He's also he was kind of brought back in a movie, but I think we could imagine him being on the TV shows. So this tier is pretty much for those initially weak villains who kind of were saved by Disney Plus or future appearances in their movies to kind of rebuild their brand. Now, in Namor's case, he would have been in a tier lower, but again, he's evil and he has a good motivation, but we haven't seen enough of him in order to really, you know, like, I can't move him higher because we haven't seen enough of him as a villain, but at the same time, he is not enough of a good guy where it's like, you know, he can be lower than that because, like, he has a good motivation as a villain. And Red Skull's a weird one because I don't know where he is. Like, I didn't know what to do with him, I'll be honest with you. Because Red Skull, in this case, right, he was controversial in Captain America, the First Avenger. His only other appearance was Infinity War, and I don't know if that really helped his character that much. But at the same time, again, I feel like he was enough of an impactful villain where he was able to kind of, you know, be above those two bottom tiers. There's one more tier, and when we get to that tier, I'll tell you what tier it was, but that was the tier he was in for a long time, and then I ended up moving him down because I was like, you know what? I just don't think he fits with these villains. I don't, like, because he wasn't, like, universally acclaimed basically as a great villain in his one movie. I feel like it's very hard to do that. I do think he's a Disney Plus sub because I do think he wants to, get a little bit of a brand rework. And I think the probably the most controversial one here was, oops, I'm reading the wrong tier. The most controversial one here would be Kang, because I just feel like he needs to be a little bit scarier to move up a few tiers. Like, I think if he just become a little bit more intimidating, he'll move up a few tiers. I couldn't put him on the tier below because that's just disrespectful. But I also, think he needs to do a little bit more. I think Red Skull probably hopes he gets the Baron Zemo treatment and gets to kind of be moved up a little bit, like he was from Falcon and the Winter Soldier. But, with that being said, let's move on to the next tier. So the Respawn tier. Now, this tier, by the way, this was a tier which I was tempted to put Red Skull in. So basically move him up a tier. And these are all characters who did decent in the time they got, but the fact that they were kind of killed repeatedly stops them from reaching new levels, right? Or they were killed, in their movie. It's kind of like they did as much as they could in one movie, but either getting killed or kind of just disappearing affected their ability to kind of move beyond that. So obviously you have a few more recent villains, right? With the evolutionary Shang-Chi villain, you have Hela, you have Killmonger, you have Ultron, and you have Ego, right? So Hela and Killmonger are the ones I want to talk about first, because Hela is here because Hela was a great villain. The problem was she died, or at least we think she's dead, right? Same with Killmonger. Killmonger probably of all these is the one who got to the peak of being like an amazing villain, probably universally acclaimed as a villain, but then he died, right? Which may have helped make him a great villain in that movie, but it does not help him move up in these tiers because they all want a second chance. Every single one of these people wishes they had a second chance, and maybe they'll get it one day, but for now, I think they're all kind of like this is kind of like they can't go any higher because they've only gotten one movie, right, to shine. Ultron, again, probably the other one where he's widely controversial as well, just like Red Skull, and I think he was considered more of a great villain than Red Skull was by people, and I think, including myself, by the way, and I think that Age of Ultron, I think, gets a little bit too much hate for certain parts of it, but I also think Ultron would have been so much more impactful had he, had the opportunity to do a little bit more, and I think that kind of hurts him, and that kind of keeps him down, so to speak. So, yeah, but basically, these people want more appearances. They wish they got more appearances. But we're getting to the elite of the elite now. So, the next tier is the Spider tier. Now, why is it called the Spider tier? Well, because you've got Vulture, Goblin, and Mysterio. Now, the Green Goblin we'll talk about in a second, but basically, the idea of this tier is that they were just so good to, all these Spider-Man villains are just so compelling and so well written and so well acted and all this other stuff that they needed their own tier. They just deserve their own tier. So that's why they've gotten their own tier. And in that, obviously, when I talk about the Green Goblin, I'm just going to say that I think even if you take out everything Sam Raimi, and I didn't know how to look at it, but either way, he was still amazing. And it's funny, right? Because I think all three of these villains, probably amongst everyone, would probably say they're better than the villains maybe outside of Killmonger on the tier below them. And they also only got one movie. So maybe these characters could have gotten a little bit further. I just think that at the end of the day, with Spider-Man villains just generally being the most compelling Marvel villains, it really, really helps them. Also, as much as I didn't take actors themselves into it, the fact that you have Michael Keaton, you have Willem Dafoe, and you have Jake Gyllenhaal as your villains, right? That just brings a talent level. But it's funny, again, because as much as I say that, you look at the bottom tier, right? You have Christian Bale and you have Jude Law at the very bottom tier of this, right? So it's not even like that's an unfallible thing. when you look at like just actors, right? And obviously in the Respawn tier, you have people like, Michael B. Jordan, and you have people like Kate Blanchett, right? And Kurt Russell. So, even though the names are there for a lot of these people, right? The Spider-Man villains, man, are just great. I don't even say any more about that. Now we're getting to the elite of the elite. Like, these are the last two tiers? Yes, 2 tiers. Hero-villain tier. Now, what is this? So, this tier exists for 2 characters. Scarlet Witch and Loki. Why? For this very simple reason. Both these characters mastered being a hero and a villain. Both of them managed to master both of these. With Loki, he's one of the best Marvel villains I think we have. But he also has managed to, through Loki, reinvent himself as a hero. And through, Ragnarok and through Infinity War, right? With Scarlet Witch, she really did a good job kind of Age of Ultron and beyond, making herself a hero. And then WandaVision and Doctor Strange happened, and she was a great villain too. So I actually think these two have just done such a great job in Scarlet Witch has only been a villain, by the way, in one movie, and she was really eking it in. But I think she did just a good job as a villain in that movie. And then obviously because she was a villain in a movie, I could use WandaVision to kind of help her case here, which means, obviously she's getting that bump, and so she's going to jump up to the top. But I mean, if you look at this and you're like those two should be there, right? Like, they've mastered both being a hero and being a villain. And I know this is a villain tier, but if you get so good at being a villain that you can just be a hero as well and be a great hero, that deserves credit. So that's what I'm going with that one. And obviously, top tier, inevitable, because obviously, the best villain in film history, the culmination of one of the greatest decades in film. Say what you will about the MCU now, and people will and have and will continue to, but man, this character Thanos was unreal. Like, just the way they built him up from the beginning, the way they handled everything about him, the way they executed finally after all the years of build-up, where, again, the thing that people forget, right, is Thanos was a very hard thing to do right. You had this guy who could have been completely terrible, right? You had this guy who you built up so much. If he was not awesome. And I think that's one of the reasons that Kang, unfortunately, is so low on this tier list, is because they just did Thanos so well that it's kind of hard to compare him to anything else. So I think at the end of the day, you have this guy who is truly inevitable and was going to be at the top of this list. Probably everyone assumed by the beginning, that he would be at the top of this list. But he's just done an impeccable job of just being a villain. Obviously, Josh Brolin did a great job. They just executed on him so well in Infinity War and then in Endgame. Even though I have a lot of problems with Endgame, Thanos is not one of them because he is just unbelievable. But overall, again, what can I say except this is the tier list, man. So with that being said, thank you all for watching. Let me know what you think of this tier list. I'm sure there are people who disagree with me, so let me know in the comments what you would change or who you would move, or I'm assuming that probably the most controversial one, Kang or Bucky or Namor probably being low, will probably bug people, but let me know, and we'll see what happens. Anyways, thank you all for watching. Bye.